It is 7 in the evening here in Chicago. So without further ado, we will get started. For those of you who I have not met, my name is Ajit Sachdeva, and I have the privilege of serving as director of the Division of Education at the American College of Surgeons. I also have the distinct honor and the great privilege of serving as co-chair of the steering committee of the ACS Academy of Master Surgeon Educators. So on behalf of the Academy and the Division of Education, I would like to welcome everyone to this Fireside Chat this evening. And we are really fortunate to have with us an icon in academic surgery and an iconic surgical leader, Dr. Tony Atala, who will be formally introduced to you by Dr. Shabahang in a few moments. But I'd like to mention that Dr. Atala is a preeminent surgeon scientist. He has done unbelievable work in the laboratory, and also he has done fantastic clinical work, and he is a urologist, a chair of urology at Wake Forest, and he is a regent of the college. He is also the recipient of the 2022 Jacobson Innovation Award, which, as you know, is the highest award offered by the college and awarded by the college for unbelievable scientific advances. And he is also a member of this academy. And above all, he is a wonderful person and a real professional and a great friend. So he'll be introduced to you by Dr. Shabahang in a few moments, who's going to be moderating this evening session. Before I introduce Dr. Shabahang, let me mention that this Fireside Chat series is sponsored by the Subcommittee on Novel Educational Methods of the Special Committee of the Academy that has been looking at the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on surgical training. I want to thank the staff, the wonderful staff we have, the core staff of the Academy, Dr. Lisa Nagler, Susan Newman, Stephen Samalchek, and Sangkom Ratsawang, who's providing tech support for this evening's program. So now back to Dr. Shabahang's credentials. As I mentioned, he chairs that subcommittee that is sponsoring this event. In his day job, and we give him very little time to do his day job, which becomes perhaps the night job, he is the CMO and the chief of the surgical service line within the WellSpan Health System, which is a big healthcare system in central Pennsylvania. Mo is a renowned surgeon educator and, of course, a member of our academy as well. So with that, Dr. Shabahang, I'll turn it over to you, and we look forward to a very exciting dialogue with Dr. Atala. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm sure you'll find this session extremely stimulating and very beneficial. So over to you, Mo.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sachdeva. I think, Stephen, we're going to do our slides, just a couple of house rules, obviously. We obviously would love to see you. If you feel comfortable, please turn on your cameras. If you wanted, we want this to be an interactive session. If you want to ask a question, please just use the annotation and raise hand, or put it in the chat box, and I'll be happy to ask Tony the questions. So we want it to be interactive. This series can be found on the webpage for the Academy of Master Surgeon Educators, and we encourage you to look at some of the other ones that we've done in the past. And final infomercial note, our grand rounds on May 19th will feature Dr. Doug Smink, Dr. Paula Termulin, and Dr. Mary Klingen-Smith on identity formation of medical students and surgery residents' impact of COVID-19 pandemic. With that, we'll take the slides away. And Dr. Atala, Tony, thank you so much for agreeing to join us. We were commenting a little bit before. We were admiring the foliage behind Tony. Many of us haven't yet to experience spring. So thank you so much for joining us. And as always, our goal is to just find out, and I know I was commenting to Tony that anyone who knows Tony knows that he's an extremely accomplished surgeon scientist, educator, leader, and yet extremely humble. So I know talking about yourself may not be the most comfortable thing, but I think that we hope to benefit from your experiences and your background tonight. As Dr. Sachdeva mentioned, Dr. Atala is the Boyce Chair of Urology at Wake Forest Medical Center and also the G-Link Professor of Urology. Tony, as anyone who's known you and has looked at your CV knows that you spent a lot of time in Louisville and then moved on to doing a pediatric urology fellowship at Boston Children's. I just want to ask you about the early phases of your career. What were the decision points? What led you to where you ended up? And what were some of the forks in the road?
Yeah, thank you, Mo. First of all, nice to be with you tonight. Thank you, Dr. Sachdeva, also, and the staff at the college, Dr. Patricia Turner, the executive director, and everybody at the college. It's always so great to be with all of you. So thank you. Just wanted to say hello, and hopefully we'll have a nice time tonight for all the folks who are participating tonight in this little chat. So thank you, Mo, for that question. Actually, I wish I could tell you that I planned everything just right, that I said, this is what I'm going to do, and this is the path I'm going to take. But nothing could be further from the truth. I actually have to tell you that nothing I ever planned actually turned out to be what happened. I mean, that's actually the truth. I actually was in medical school, and I thought I wanted to be a medical doctor, not a surgeon. I thought it would be in private practice, not in academics. I thought I'd be practicing by the beach. I'm close to the mountains. I thought so everything turned out to be totally different. So it's just, followed the path. I just followed the path. It's one of those things that doors opened up and I walked through them, and when those doors became available, it was just a decision to just open that door and see what was on the other side.
Can I ask you, so a couple of these forks, how come not medicine and you went into a surgical field? What was that? What was the deciding point there?
I was in med school and I really did not think I wanted to be in a surgical specialty. And in fact, I planned all my rotations so I would do surgery last, during my sophomore year and junior year. And what happened was that actually when I finally got to surgery, I'll never forget this. I actually walked into the operating room that first day, and I remember seeing that case, that general surgery case, and I just absolutely fell in love with it. It was amazing. This overwhelming feeling that said to me, this is what I really want to do. I'm seeing people do just amazing things here. And it really changed my trajectory. And that very moment I said, I'm going to do surgery. And interestingly, then I was actually not knowing what surgical specialty I would do. I was trying all these different surgical specialties, and I was walking back from the parking lot one day, talking to one of my classmates, and he said, I asked him, what is he going to do? And he said, I'm going to do urology. And I said, really? He said, yeah, it's a great specialty. I had an elective. It was great. So I decided I'm going to do this elective. And then again, it was, I really loved what I saw. So that really in med school, actually, I decided this is what I want to do. I wanted to be a surgeon. And I really entertained all kinds of surgery. At the end of the day, I decided on urology because I saw that you were doing both, open surgery and minimally invasive surgery. I loved all the gadgets behind urology. As the specialty has always been at the leading edge in terms of robotic surgery and minimally invasive surgery. And I really like that aspect of it as well. I like the reconstructive surgery as well as the minimally invasive aspect of the field.
So Tony, based upon these experiences, so when medical students or residents or others, young faculty come to you and ask for advice, what would your take home be from the concept that you just mentioned, that things seem to not end up where you thought they would end up?
You know, my advice is always you have to be exposed to everything. That's been my recurring theme in terms of training. You know, when in our training program, whether it be in the research arena or in the clinical arena, in fact, we've designed our entire residency program around that concept, you know, that we really want the residents to be exposed to as many different things as they're able to, because you never know what your passion's going to be unless you try it, unless you've had that experience.
What took you to Boston?
Well, you know, I was in med school, and I then decided that I would do urology. And I remember those were the days when you would do 2 years of general surgery. You know, you had to do the 2 years of general surgery. I'll never forget my very first day as a general surgery intern. And Dr. Hiram Polk, you know, walked down the hallway to the front of the auditorium, and he was like George Patton, you know, this is what we're gonna do. This is what you're gonna be doing and learning. And it was really interesting, you know. I just said, wow, you know, this is gonna be really cool. It's gonna be a lot of work, but I'm gonna really like this. And I'll never forget what he said. He said that as a surgeon, you are gonna work hard. You're gonna, you know, be taking care of your patients. But, you know, it's that attention to detail that's going to make a difference, that attention to detail in everything you do for the patient. And so, interestingly, I decided that I would, you know, pursue, that's what actually, by seeing what was going on, I actually ended up deciding that I really did want to do academics after all. So that was my next step in my thought process. Being in a program like that where, you know, there was a lot of clinical research going on and all the new developments, it really inspired me really to pursue an academic career at that point. And so having done that, I realized that I really wanted to do pediatric urology. I love the reconstructive aspect of the field, you know, that you really get in there and you know, you're looking at these congenital abnormalities and you really have to figure out what you're going to do once you're in the operating room. And I like the creative side of the surgical reconstructive aspect of pediatric urology. So I actually applied to fellowship program in Boston, and I applied to many programs, but really Boston was the place that I really wanted to go. It was really, you know, an excellent program in the field. I really thought it was going to, you know, I love what they were doing there. And so I decided this is what I want to do. So that's what took me to Boston, was my fellowship.
Excellent. And you know, we're chronicling things, but each one is, again, a fork in the road. And obviously, Dr. Sachdeva alluded to all the awards you've won for innovation, and you obviously you've been inducted into the National Academy of Science, and your research became a big part of your career. Can you share with us a little bit what got you there to being the surgeon scientist, and what path, what took you there?
Sure. You know, that's an interesting story, because I have to tell you, I never, ever wanted to do research. Zero. It was not in my list. I really had no intention of doing it. And I had no interest whatsoever in doing basic research. I mean, I love the clinical aspect of academia, and I love the case studies and the clinical series, but I really did not want to be involved in basic research at all. And so when I was accepted to the fellowship, you know, I was accepted to the fellowship, and then I got the word that I was accepted. And then about maybe a few weeks later, Dr. Alan Reddicks, who was the surgeon, the head of pediatric urology at Boston Children's Hospital, who then went on to become the surgeon in chief there, he called me up and he said, you know, we've made the decision just recently in the last few weeks that we are going to add a research year into the fellowship program. And therefore, we're going to give you first choice. I'm going to give you first choice of what you want to do, because we're going to do this transition period where we're going to have two fellows come in, two trainees come in. One will go into the research track where they will do the research year first and then the clinical track, and then the other one will go straight into the clinical track. And I said to him, Dr. Reddick, I thank you for the choice, but the choice for me is clear. I just want to do clinical work. That's all I want to do. And he said, really? And I said, yeah, really, that's all I want to do. And he said, I really want you to think about it. I really want you to think about it and give it some thought. And I said, why? He said, well, you obviously you like academics, and that's something you should consider. So think about it. So I'll call you back in about a week or so. And I said, okay. So I did. I thought about it. I talked to my mentors. I talked to my colleagues. I talked to my wife. And Dr. Reddick did call me a week later, and he said, what will it, have you made your choice? Do you want to do the clinical track or the research and clinical track? And I said, Dr. Reddick, I've really given it a lot of thought, and I still only want to do the clinical track. And he said, really? I said, yeah, really, that's what I want to do. So he said, okay, is your wife home? I'd just like to say hello. I said, sure. So she got on the phone. He got on the phone with her. They chatted for a few minutes. They got off the phone. He said, okay, well, you guys think about it some more. Call me back. And I got off the phone. My wife, Catherine, looked at me and she said, you really ought to do that research year. And I said, why? What do you mean? Why should I do that? And I said, obviously he thinks that you would be better off doing that extra research year. You should listen to him. He knows what he's talking about. So I said, okay, that's what I'll do. So that's how I ended up doing research. That's exact. So I ended up doing my training with the research year. And once I got there, they were just starting the lab out, actually. So the scientists they had hired had not yet arrived and was not scheduled to arrive for another 6 weeks or so. Michael Freeman, who became a dear friend and a colleague. And so when I got there, Michael Freeman had sent a technician to Boston to get the lab set up, Paul Guthrie. And so I got there and I said, well, I'm not going to waste, 6 weeks before this person gets here. And that's an interesting story because that's when I, decided that I would do this project. I had some, colleagues along the way and faculty, and they kind of said, well, maybe you may want to consider doing these types of projects. So by the time that Michael Freeman got to the lab, it was 6 weeks later, and he said, can you help me in my project? And I said, actually, I already have a project. Can you help me do mine? And so that's how I got involved in research and how I got involved in the field of regenerative medicine, trying to really get cells and tissues to grow. And there was a history behind that in Boston that I can go into as well.
And I just want to ask you, what do you think Dr. Reddicks saw in you that made him, was there anything that later on you found out that there was something he saw that said, I think Tony needs to go and to do this year of research?
Well, what happened was that I had already published a number of papers in residency. And I was working on some devices that were being used clinically. So I had actually, just because of the need, there were some things that we were doing in urology, like, that I thought, maybe could be better handled. So I kind of came up with a couple of devices while I was in my residency. And he thought that I could do that in other areas as well in pediatric urology. And I asked him about that because he reminded me that when I went to the interview, that he asked me what I had been working on. And in my briefcase, I actually had one of these devices and I took it out and I showed it to him. So he reminded me of that. He reminded me, I'll never forget when you came to the end, I asked you this and you pulled this thing out of your briefcase. So I guess he kind of thought that, probably I would enjoy doing that. I would enjoy, doing this kind of work.
It is fascinating because I only ask that because, so many times, we're in a college age or medical school age and you self-criticize that you don't know exactly what you want to do. And this story is just such a inspiring story of all the different forks in the road and how you how you ended up doing this.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Is what I said. I never expected to do what I'm doing today. And that's why, had I not been exposed to research, I would have never found that as part of my work life. I love the clinical work that I do. It's still what I love the most is doing my clinical work. And I'm happiest in the operating room. I always like to say that's where I'm happiest, is when I'm in the operating room. But certainly, having this other aspect to my work life has been very, very, another aspect I would have never had it not been for that experience.
Tony, you mentioned kind of the other story. Can you tell us a little bit, and I know there are several people from your organization who most probably know your research very well, but for the rest, can you tell us more about the research and what stimulates you about it right now? What are the parts that you're most proud of through the years and so on?
Well, Boston had a history already of, the area of tissue engineering. A lot of work had been done there by Yanni Yanis, who was a professor at MIT, had actually started working with growing skin cells with Dr. Burke at the MGH. So that was a history in the 1970s of work that had been done in Boston. And then in the 1980s, Bob Langer, who was also at MIT, and Jay Vicanti, who was at Children's Hospital Boston, had also been working on liver engineering. And interestingly, basically that's when the thought was, I had a couple of faculty in urology that, Jim Mendel and Craig Peters, and of course, Alan Reddicks as well. And our lab was right next door to these labs, right? And so so the next thing was really, maybe this is something that I want to work on, is to try to do this for the urinary tract. But the challenge was that you really couldn't get the cells to grow. And it was the same for the liver, right? You couldn't get the liver cells to expand, and you couldn't get a lot of these cells to expand. That was the challenge, right? You could get cells and put them on a scaffold and they would reconstitute, but you really couldn't translate that clinically, because the key was really getting cells to grow. And interestingly, the first person that actually tried this, of putting cells in a scaffold, actually goes back to the 1960s. So, it's actually before Yanni Yanis, it's actually before Bob Langer and Greg Berg and Jay. It really goes back to the 1960s. So it was actually a urologist, Emil Tanago from San Francisco, who actually ended up putting cells on a scaffold. That was the very first demonstration of cells on a scaffold, was in the 1960s from San Francisco. So like anything else, you are really, you're really standing on the shoulder of giants, as and the work that has happened before you. And our project was really very simple. Can we get, of course, I look back how naive I was, in my research here, to say I'm going to try to build, an organ. That was the most naive thing I could have ever said. But in reality, if I had known then what I know now, I probably would have never started on that project of actually creating, an organ. And the interesting thing was that I think there's something to be said about, in research, not getting yourself in a box, because you're often a prisoner, if you will, of the own walls that science creates around you. And sometimes having a little bit of, being a little bit naive actually is helpful, because then you end up doing things that, other people think are totally impossible, but, maybe they can get done. So I actually also tell our students and our trainees and our doctoral fellows that, really think outside the box. You got to really be out there. Don't let the current scientific dogma hold you hostage. So I was totally naive, really, and then just basically ended up growing cells and growing tissues. And we started out with tissues in the urinary tract, but we then quickly, when we had success in the urinary tract, we started, looking at tissues in other organ systems as well that we could actually create in the laboratory and then implant into patients. And it was really a journey to make that happen. It was, a lot of challenges along the way to make it so.
It's interesting. I was recently reading a book called Illogical by Emmanuel Acho, and he says, be illogical. Don't let the conventional wisdom stop you. And I think as I'm listening to you, in a way, that naivete, that what you're referring to as a naivete, seems to have actually helped dream of things that maybe you wouldn't have dreamt of otherwise.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that when it comes to research, the typical way, and we're all taught this, right? We're all taught that we have to do hypothesis-driven research one step at a time, and that you have to go, in a stepwise manner. And it's certainly very important. Hypothesis-driven research is very important. But I think it's also, I think the new way of doing research, where it's team research and getting everyone together and getting all different, people with different backgrounds and different areas of expertise, is just very energizing, because you learn from each other and you can really push the frontiers even further with a team approach in getting things done.
And Tony, so how do you, and I just want to mention to our participants, please, if you want to ask Tony questions, please either raise your hand and ask it, or just put it in the chat box and we'll be sure to ask it. So I just want to make sure I mention that again and again. Otherwise, I'll just keep going on. So Tony, how do you balance being a surgeon scientist, leader, clinician? It is a lot, and it's a lot of conflicting interests. How do you balance that? What's your advice to someone else who says, I want to be a surgeon scientist?
You really have to, first of all, for the young, trainees who are wanting to go on this path, I think it's very important to be in an environment that values academics and research, and where folks are going to be protected. So it starts really when your career starts, right? That's really when it starts, because interestingly, when I finished my training in Boston, I knew I wanted to do both research and academia. I mean, research and clinical practice and academia as well. But, I knew that's what I wanted to do. And I really had a lot of offers to go to different jobs. I mean, I really did. And, because that pediatric urology back then was something that was in high demand. And so there were all these jobs, and there were a lot of good paying jobs, that were paying a lot of money for a pediatric urologist. But what I really was looking for was a place where I could have protected time, where I could do my clinical work and still do my research, and where my clinical practice would not overtake that time in the research arena. And so that's when, I was offered a job in Boston. And I have to tell you, the job I was offered in Boston, I had another job offer. I was considering 2 job offers. And the other one was actually, I looked at a lot of places, but at the end of the day, I had always thought I would go back to Louisville, Kentucky. That's what I thought. And so I had an offer from Louisville. So at the end of the day, I considered 2 main offers, even though, and the job in Louisville was going to be where I was going to, be practicing, but I really didn't, I didn't have a group of people around me that could protect my clinical time. And in Boston, I had all these people around me that could protect my clinical time. And I can tell you that the salary I was going to make in one place was going to, if you took it was going to be like 3 times the salary once you considered the inflation and the cost of living difference. But I chose the job that paid a lot less, but I had to protect the time. So I always say that, if you really want to develop your career in research, that you really need that protected time when you first start out. That's my big message to folks who really want to do the research, and don't sacrifice the financial for your career goals. I mean, that's really the key. And eventually it'll pay off. I mean, because a research career, will also be financially rewarding at the end of the day, but it takes time to get there. But you're going to be doing what you love. So I think that's an important decision process for people coming out of training. They really need to have that protected time. So that's the first thing. And then the other thing, as you become a faculty member, as you become a more senior faculty member, the temptation is always there to let things say yes to everything. Right? I mean, that's always a temptation. And so one of the hardest lessons is learn to say no. Learn to say no to many things. So you keep the main thing. And the main thing really should be your clinical work and your research, your academic path, if that's the path you want to take. The other thing I have to say about this is that if you're going to be a researcher doing both clinical and research, you really have to be extremely well trained clinically. I mean, I give a lot of credit. The fact that I was at Boston Children's Hospital, where we were seeing all these problem patients, and everyone was sending us the patients they couldn't do from all over the country, and we had all these pediatric surgeons doing all these different types of procedures. And I was very lucky because I trained with both Alan Reddick and Hardy Hendren, right? Both were my mentors, and so I had a really, really amazing training with both Hardy Hendren and Alan Reddick. And learning reconstruction and learning the very, very tough cases. I think that's critical, because if you're going to go into a research career, you really have to make sure that you have that clinical expertise that is needed before you open up shop. Because you know how that 10,000 hour rule applies about being, you really got to get that in before you really need to do a lot of cases and be well trained clinically. Because if you're doing both clinical work and research, the last thing you want to do is not have that clinical expertise to take care of your patients, because you need that training ahead of time. You don't want to get that training after you start your practice. You need that training before you start your practice. So I think that's a very important lesson, that if you want to go into a research track, that your clinical training has to be really the best that you can get, so that you're able to handle any patient that comes through the door, so that you're not falling behind once you start your surgical training and your surgical practice.
Is the key, you mentioned kind of going to a place where it's appreciated, that there's protected time. Does that change later in your career? Are there other things to someone who's mid-career or later in their career? Is there advice you would give as to how you balance being a clinician and scientist and what the key is, or are the keys the same things?
Yeah, so really the key then becomes you have to learn to compartmentalize very well. You really do. I mean, when I'm in the operating room, that's all I think about. I'm there entirely. When I'm in the clinic, seeing my patients, that's all I worry. That's all I take. I do it by days, right? So you have to do that. And I'll tell you, it's interesting because, it's to an extreme. You really have to be that way to an extreme. When you're doing your research, you have to be doing your research and you have to concentrate on that. And you need that protected time then still, because you don't want to be on call when you're doing your research, right? You want to be on call when you're doing your OR days and your clinic days, and you want to do your research when you're doing your research days. And so you need to keep that very, very well compartmentalized. And the interesting thing about that is that, I take it to an extreme. I really do. In the operating room, from the research labs, I would often get asked, well, if you're going to be there, we're going to consent this patient so you can get a discard specimen. And I would be in that case, and I would totally forget. I just would never ever remember to get a discard specimen for the research lab. And I finally told him, don't ask me, because I'm not going to remember, because when I'm in the operating room, that's all I'm thinking about. And if you really want a specimen, a discard specimen, someone's going to have to come to the operating room to get it and remind me to do so, because I'm not going to remember to do that. So that's just illustrating a story to an extreme, right? You have to be there entirely. And you should not let the two things collide, because your patient care, always comes number one, right? And you have to make sure when you're there that that's what you're taking care of. And at the same time, when you're doing your research, that you're not having that time impacted by being on call or, having to do something. And then that's where you need partners that help protect you, just like you protect them when you yourself are on call.
So, Tony, you've been at Wake Forest, if I'm not mistaken, since 2004. I'm getting that right, correct? So what was your journey to Wake Forest? What brought you there? As you mentioned, you were thinking Louisville or Boston. And so what brought you to Wake Forest? What has kept you there?
Well, I was a faculty member in Boston, and I had really, really good support. I mentioned Alan Reddick and Hardy Hendren, and they were great. I was actually, very, very happy there as a faculty member. I was there for a number of years, and I never had any intention of leaving. I really didn't. This is where I was going to stay. And then, an interesting thing happened. I got a phone call one day from Dave McCullough, who was the head of urology at Wake Forest, and he said, I'd like to see if you'd like to come and, have a job here. And I said, I'm not really looking. Yeah, I'm not looking. I'm not movable. So, and then he said, okay, I understand. And plus I was having our first baby. We were having our first baby, and I really didn't want to even entertain that. And so he called back 2 years later, and he said, how about now? Are you ready now to move? And I said, well, I'm still not looking. I'm really not wanting to move. And he said, well, why don't you come as a visiting professor? And I said, okay, I'll come as a visiting professor, but just so you know, it just has to be a visiting professorship. I am not movable. I really am not movable. I'll come and I'll be happy to spend a couple of days there. And he said, okay, that's fine. So I went, I came to Wake Forest as a visiting professor, and before you know it, I'm having dinner at the president's home that night. I'm saying, well, wait a second, at the president of the whole university. And then I'm having dinner with the dean, and then they take me over to see the president at the time, Dick Dean. And I'm in his office, and Dick Dean, who, vascular surgeon, who was the president of the and CEO of the enterprise, he said, we're building a research park, and we're putting this whole research park together, and we're going to do this in Winston-Salem. And, and I said, that's nice. It's really nice. Well, anyhow, he came, he was building the research park, and he called me up and he said, we're going to be up there in Boston, because the architectural firm that we're using is in Boston, and we'd like to come by and pay you a visit. And it was him and the dean. It was, and so they flew up to Boston, and they came by the lab to visit and say hello. And we went out to dinner, and at that dinner, my wife came along, and Richard Dean, I excused myself to, from the restaurant when we first got there, so I could, go freshen up. And when I went to freshen up, Dick Dean turns to my wife and says, I just want you to know we're here to recruit your husband. And my wife told Dick Dean, she said, well, I don't know if he's going to go, but I'll be there. I'll move to North Carolina. So, so that's a true story. And then Dick Dean actually, started to recruit me, and he turned me over to Wayne Meredith. And we had a wonderful time. Wayne came to Boston to do a course, and Wayne Meredith, who's, became a dear friend and a colleague. And, Wayne actually, never thought I would make the move. And actually, I never thought I would make the move either. It took several years and a lot of going back and forth. But finally, the offer was too good to turn down. And actually, I knew that I could work with Wayne, and I just, really, love Wayne Meredith. I'm telling him that right now. It was just great. I said, this is somebody I can work with, and a lot of people, played a role. Dick Dean and Doug Edgton and Terry Hales, and a lot of people that worked on the recruitment, Dave McCullough. but really it was basically saying I can work with Wayne Meredith. And so I was offered both, the chair job, which I was never intending to do. I was never intending to be a chair either. So that's another story. But I ended up being the chair and starting the institute here at the research park. And so finally I made it to Wake Forest. And of course, my wife was happy that I did. And so was I.
Tony, I'm kind of seeing a common theme with your wife being in the middle of all the decisions. And that seems to be the route for any decisions.
Absolutely. Listen to your wife.
I want to ask you a little bit, I'm just keeping track of time and I know we have 18 minutes and I definitely want to ask you lessons of leadership and where, you've obviously been an educator, a clinician, a researcher, and you've been a leader. What have you learned from that aspect of your career?
So, basically, in terms of the as an educator, you mean in terms of
maybe more as a leader of the Department of Urology and as an educator?
Yeah, so I think, I think really in leadership, I just follow one simple rule, and that is that really, how can you actually support the folks that work with you? That's really it. I mean, it's very simple. How do you support them? How do you make sure that they're going to be the best that they can be, and that they're going to do the best, and they're going to do what they want to do? And I think that's really it. You hear a lot about people putting people in the right seat of the bus, and I think it's really true in terms of what people want to do, and how do you make them succeed at what they want to do and keep them, and that's how they're going to be happy. That's how they're going to be happy. And so if you help them succeed in what they want to achieve, they're going to be happy. And then if they're happy, they're going to do their best. And if they do their best, then your department's going to be happy, and you're going to be happy, and everyone's going to be. And I don't mean happy in a sense, in the sense of, it's really just being satisfied with your job and what you're doing, and knowing that you're being supported. So, some folks are great at being the best teachers that they can be. Some folks are best at doing great research. Some are great at doing excellent clinical work. Some are great at doing all three, and so it's just really, tapping onto folks' talents and then also pushing them a little bit into areas that they can be exposed to where they could also thrive. And that's really true whether I'm actually talking about our research enterprise or a clinical enterprise. Is really, how do you support folks, and this is recognizing talent, but it's also making sure that you cultivate their talent to their best of their ability, and make sure that you're there for them in terms of their preferences. And that means at all levels, including people who want just, maybe they don't want to work, they're going through, starting a family, and then they want to slow down, and you have to be accommodating to folks and make sure that you meet them where they want to be. I'll give you an example. When I never set rules about vacations or time off, ever. I never did. I just never did. They say, well, what's the policy for vacations? There is no policies, whatever you want it to be. Well, what's the policy about time? This is for our faculty, and there was no policy for vacations or taking time off. I said, look, you decide what you want to do. And, isn't that interesting? Because they all really work really, really hard, regardless, knowing that they could do whatever they wanted to do when they wanted to do it. So that personal freedom is important as well. We were very hard. We all work very hard as surgeons, and we have very little left in terms of things that are not regulated, right? Medical records have gone electronic, and all these new rules and regulations. The last thing that we have is really how we practice and how we teach and how we do academics. And I think it's really important to support them.
I'm going to just cheat and steal this question from a favorite podcast that I listened to. But what is the best piece of advice you've gotten about leadership that you totally believe in and think it was the best advice, or what's the worst piece of advice you got that later on you're like, that was totally wrong?
Well, it's interesting. It's so funny because I really, when I was in college, I actually read a lot of books about leadership. It was just something that I really liked to do. So I actually had read a lot of books about leadership. And, there are many, and I have a whole bookshelf of books that I read on leadership. And then I never looked at them again. I just never looked at them. But I do remember going through all these books and you name it, all these books out there, they're out there on leadership. And I remember that all these books were so different. Everyone had their own philosophy about leadership. And one book said, if you're a leader, you don't want to be too available. Actually, that's one of the books said that. Another book said you have to be available. I just couldn't believe the contrast in these books from people who really were experts. I tell you, the best, having a wife who's a psychiatrist, I can tell you that the best lesson that I learned about leadership is really, is what is that's motivating people, and to meet them based on what they want. That's really the key. Is what I mentioned to you before, is the advice that I have followed my whole life, because my whole career, because really helping people succeed is probably the most important thing that we can do in academia. That's why we're here, right? The reason why we're in academia is because we like to teach, and we like to develop the next generation of physicians, and you want to develop your faculty and make them succeed and be the best that they can be. And the question is, how do you make that happen? So it's about servant leadership, really. And I know that term gets overused, but I really do believe that, I see the faculty and the rest, I see everybody as, I'm working for them. Those are my bosses, really.
That is absolutely inspiring. It really, thank you for saying that. And it's so inspiring. So as you, and obviously I have no idea how much longer you are going to work, but as you go into, as you are in most probably the last kind of couple of decades of your career, and whatever that may be, what is it that, when you think about what is it that gives you meaning at this stage? And is it the same thing that gave you meaning 10 years ago or 20 years ago? And how has that evolved?
Yes, it's interesting, right? Because my research career has been about getting technologies to patients, right? Making patients' lives better through regenerative medicine. And that has been a major goal for my career, and then making patients better through our practice, So, our mission, my personal mission has never deviated, and it's never changed. It's really interesting. I'm just as excited today about what I do as I was, 10 years ago and 20 years ago. I'm very excited about what I do. And also being at a great place like Wake Forest. We really have had just amazing transformational changes just in the last few years. Julie Freischlag, who's our current president, is here as well. And, she's been an amazing, great leader. I'm not saying that because, Julie's here, but I say it all the time. We have this merger with Atrium that has been amazing for us. We have this, great network that we have now with Atrium. We're now delivering babies at Wake Forest, which we didn't used to do just a few years ago. It was just a decision to make that happen, and it happened when Julie came on board. We are, major investments in education. I'm very excited. I'm more excited now, actually, than I've ever been, because there's so many good things going on. Wake Forest is a great place to be, and my clinical practice and my research, I keep loving what I do, and our department and institute are, going very well. We basically, at the end of the day, what we do is really take care of patients. That comes number one, and everything else surrounds that area. So maybe I can tell you a little bit about that philosophy, that you cannot really, you cannot really have a good research enterprise or a good educational experience unless you have a very strong clinical program. That's number one. So it all starts and ends with having a good clinical program. And if you have an excellent, if you are able to achieve excellence in your clinical program in terms of making sure you have the volume of patients and that you have the expertise with your faculty, then by its very nature, education will take care of itself, because the residents and students will learn because you're doing, the best that you can in terms of patient care. And if you recognize that, and that's when research comes in, because if you are at that stage where you are really doing the best that you can for your patients, you really are at that stage where, everything's going well, great faculty, they're all working hard, they're all taking care of patients. And, and that's when the learners and the faculty start saying, we're practicing the best that we can, but it's still not good enough, right? It's still not good enough. If we're doing the best that we can, it's still not good enough. There's a problem here that needs to be solved. But if you're expending all your energy to get to a good spot clinically, you're not going to be thinking about that, right? You're going to be thinking, how can I get to the best spot of practicing clinically at a good level? But if you're already practicing at a good clinical level, then and only then do you really have the luxury to say, if this is the best we can do, how can we make it better? And that's really when the clinical questions start coming up. How can we make it better? That's when you can start partnering with your research team to try to solve the problems for tomorrow. But it all really starts with that clinical care.
Just pausing in the last 7 minutes just to see if there are any questions or comments from our participants. Please just state it or raise your hand. Dr. Schwartz, please.
Thank you. For full disclosure, I've been several decades, and I've had the privilege of working at the Wake Forest Institute for Regenerative Medicine for the past 3 years. So I have a firsthand view of the amazing accomplishments that Dr. Atala has had, and I've also seen his CV. And if you reviewed that, Mo, over this, it would have taken the whole hour to really describe everything that Tony has done. The question that I have, because I've had firsthand knowledge of what his day is like, how did you develop these time management skills to be able to do all this? Because it's just been amazing to me.
Thank you, Marshall. It's good to see you tonight. And really, well, I must confess that I really don't need much sleep. I guess that's part of it, actually. And that's been, I really don't need, I never have needed much sleep. So I really do get extra hours in the day. So that's part of the answer, really. I only need about 4.5 hours of sleep.
Wow.
And so that really gives me extra hours in the day. And so it's just, I can, get more done because I have more hours that I can use in the day. I mean, that's really a lot of what I do.
Dr. Meredith.
Tony, I want to ask you about collaboration, because you're really one of the best collaborators and the most profound generators of collaboration I've ever seen. And I'll tell a little story. When you first got to Wake Forest, it took him about 10 minutes to need more lab space than we already had for him. And we started looking for more lab space. Almost everyone is looking for isolated labs, one lab for each scientist and a bench for them and some support people. Tony said, I don't want space like that. I want wide open space with lots of areas where everybody has to bump into everybody else every day. And I would rather take this space that's over here, that's just wide open benches. And the Wake Forest Institute for Regenerative Medicine is still built to this day along that concept. And it's around the concept of helping, forcing, encouraging people to collaborate. Talk to us a little bit about your philosophy about collaboration.
Yes, thanks, Wayne. Thank you for that question. And I came from Boston, and Boston does not have a great reputation for collaborations, as you know. I mean, people who've been there know that sometimes it's a tough thing to collaborate in Boston because people are really sticking to themselves. But what I did learn from my lab at Boston, because I did start my lab, of course, in Boston, and then I moved my lab to Wake Forest, and we had about 25 people in the lab when we moved, and then we had a group that moved with us to North Carolina. What I learned was that we had very tight space in Boston, very, very tight space. Space was at a premium. And you really had to stack things up. We had every single inch of space spoken for. And what I realized, what I really learned was that it was great having all those people together in a small space. I mean, it was the best thing ever because there were no communication challenges. I mean, maybe a few, but not as much as you would expect. And people knew what everybody was doing and people were helping each other out. So it really it really kind of formed my philosophy that really, I wanted as many people as possible in as small a space as possible. And that's why when we moved to the Institute, the building, we only took one floor and, out of the 5 floors. And I remember them saying, do you want more space? And I said, no, I really don't want more space. I really don't want more space. And then we did end up taking up the 2nd floor. And then we ended up now we have the whole building, after all these years, we do have the whole building. But I was actually very reluctant every time to increase the space because it's like atoms, You know how you have all these atoms together, all these molecules together, and they're going to have all these reactions together if they're together, but not if they're apart. So it's the same thing with people. You want them all interacting together because that's where thoughts come. That's where people can brainstorm together and advance the science.
Thank you. Thank you. Tony, as we are coming to the end of the hour, any final, you've given us a lot of pearls tonight, and thank you. And I just, I think anyone who knows you knows the wonderful level of humility that you have. And we mentioned that before we started tonight. And I know that I've been honored to experience that in the last 2 years. Any final pearls for those who are on tonight or those who are going to be watching this later on?
Well, thank you, Mo. I'm just so thankful, for our team members. It's a team effort. Everything we do is a team effort. And I'm so, I tell you, you can do a lot more together. And so I'm thankful to our teams and thankful to our research team, our surgical teams. And it's all about teamwork. It's all about teamwork, getting people to work together for the good of all.
Tony, this has been inspirational. Thank you so very much. And thank you to all of our participants. Dr. Sachdeva, back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Atala, for a fabulous evening together. We have learned from your wisdom, your practical advice, and really your inspirational comments. You are a role model for all of us. And I'm glad Dr. Meredith brought up the issue of collaboration. And clearly that is the key to everything that we want to do and need to do to get ahead. The other thing that I really enjoyed hearing about was your emphasis on excellence. Clinical excellence first, and then research excellence to follow. And that needs to be on a foundation of doing great work at all levels. I have truly enjoyed your passion that is always visible and was so visible this evening. And you have been a real leader for all of us to look up to. And certainly your team and your department is very fortunate to have you there. And we have Dr. Freischlag on this call. We have Dr. Meredith, of course, and a bunch of other folks, your friends. And we all really appreciate everything you do for us each day. And I want to thank you for everything you've done for the Academy and for our Division of Education as well. And thank you, Mo, for leading this discussion so well. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Have a lovely night, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Grand Rounds and at the next Fireside Chat. Thanks again, Dr. Atala.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Tony.